It was a quiet afternoon on November 13th, 1946 in Schenectady, New York. Vincent Schaefer was a meteorologist and researcher working at General Electric. After finishing lunch with his colleagues, Schaefer returned to his lab and discovered someone had turned off his special freezer. This freezer was an invention Schaefer made to help him better understand the way ice forms inside of clouds. In an attempt to cool it down as quickly as possible, he placed a block of dry ice inside the freezer, and to his surprise, a cloud of glistening ice crystals instantly formed in the air, and Schaefer knew he had made a major discovery. Shortly after, Vincent Schaefer conducted the first successful weather modification experiment, taking to the skies in a plane above the Adirondack Mountains of New York. He dropped the dry ice into the clouds, and just like he predicted, snow began to fall almost immediately. Since Schaefer's experiment in the mid-1940s, scientists have been intentionally manipulating the weather. Weather modification, as it's called, can have many goals, such as preventing weather damage, increasing water supplies, or even gaining a military advantage, but we will talk about that shortly. Despite all of this, weather experts say that intentional weather modification has limited and localized effects. But is that really the truth? Well, Vincent Schaefer's discovery, cloud seeding, was the first weather modification technique. But what exactly is cloud seeding? Cloud seeding is the process of spreading a substance, such as dry ice, into a cloud, giving it a surface to form water or snowflakes, creating rain or snow. This is something that scientists have known about for well over half a century. So you might wonder, what have they accomplished so far with the cloud seeding technique? Well, in large countries such as the United States and China, cloud seeding is used to combat droughts in large arid regions, and to help disperse fog around airports to increase safety. But what if I told you that the US military used cloud seeding to gain an advantage in one of its most infamous conflicts? A couple of decades after Schaefer's first cloud seeding experiment, in the middle of the Vietnam War, in a program known as Operation Popeye, the US military attempted to extend the monsoon season in Vietnam to disrupt the enemy's supply chains by causing flooding and landslides. Were they successful? Well, the operation's stated objective of winning the war was never achieved, but the Department of Defense scientists say the operation was successful in raising and maintaining rainfall levels to saturate the land for extended periods. The program was conducted over 4 different Southeast Asian countries without the authorization of then Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird. Allegedly, Operation Popeye was sponsored by the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who had completely denied to Congress that a program for using weather modification as a tactical weapon ever existed. I mean, I would probably say the same thing, considering nobody in their right mind would approve of such a program, but funnily enough, this wouldn't be the last time we would see the United States military dabble in weather experimenting. In the 1990s, in a joint effort, the US Air Force, US Navy, and US Department of Defense established the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP for short. HAARP's primary purpose studied the ionosphere. What is the ionosphere? The ionosphere is the part of Earth's atmosphere that affects how radio waves travel. By learning more about the ionosphere, the US military could create better radio and satellite communication systems. How does it work? Well, its main tool is called the Ionospheric Research Instrument, and it allows scientists to study radio signals that they send into the ionosphere and measure any interference. For years, they did just that, laying the groundwork for further research and technological development in communications. But what else did the US military use HAARP for? Well, about 10 years after HAARP first started operating, the US military funded a project to study the Aurora Borealis and Aurora Australis, or the Northern and Southern Lights. They planned to do this by heating parts of the atmosphere to create a small-scale version of the aurora. But wait, if HAARP's purpose was to study the ionosphere, then why all of a sudden are they trying to alter it? Well, this exact question is what led to many conspiracy theories being formed surrounding the military's true intentions with HAARP. And today we are going to pick possibly the most thought-provoking theory and try and break it down. In the same year as HAARP's artificial aurora experiments, America faced one of the most powerful hurricanes in its history, Hurricane Katrina. This Category 3 turned to Category 5 hurricane tore almost 100 miles inland through the country's southern coast, completely devastating the city of New Orleans. But what does this have to do with HAARP? Well, believe it or not, there are a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, that believe that the US government either amplified Hurricane Katrina or even forced it to form entirely. How could HAARP create a hurricane? Well, based on its past experiments, we know that to some extent it has the ability to directly alter the ionosphere, and not just measure it. However, despite this, there is no direct scientific evidence to back up these claims. But that does lead us to the question of why would a government ever want its own people to experience natural disasters? Well, today we are going to imagine that the US government was behind Hurricane Katrina. I'm going to explain 3 of the different reasons that I have found make a little sense for why the government would have wanted to cause such a devastating natural disaster on its own inhabitants. What the hell is gentrification? Well, put simply, it is the process of wealthier residents moving into an urban area, reshaping the demography. Think about it like this. Hurricane Katrina was so catastrophic that estimates value the damages at around $125 billion. Remember this number for later. Over 400,000 of the city's 485,000 residents were forced to leave their homes. Now, 19 years later, the city sits at around 370,000 in population, meaning that at least 115,000 of the original residents never came back. But why not? Perhaps some of them were traumatized at the amount of flooding, but for a lot of them, they simply couldn't afford to move back. When rebuilding the city, the real estate developers worked to increase the property values from before the disaster. I mean, why wouldn't they? However, by doing this, they are simultaneously forcing many of the original residents to find a new city to call home. But why would the government want to do this? Well, this could help them change or control both the political and economic landscapes of the city. By changing the demographics of the city, they can change its overall politics and possibly its elected officials. Not to mention, New Orleans is home to the 5th largest trading port in the entire Gulf of Mexico. After being destroyed by the hurricane, the government had complete control over how the port of New Orleans was reconstructed, leading to many operational changes. While this reason is not likely, it would directly benefit the government more than the other potential reasons I found. A second potential reason for the US government to cause a natural disaster on its own citizens is for economic gains from reconstruction contracts. Now, I'm definitely not pointing any fingers, but after spending almost 20 years fighting in Vietnam, I also wouldn't put it past them. Like I mentioned before, there was an estimated $125 billion in damages to the city. $125 billion that would have to go into someone's pockets. While the government didn't directly profit from reconstruction contracts, many people and large corporations did. What if a large corporation, not to say any names, wanted to make insane profits from such a natural disaster and urged the government to create a disaster to destroy a city? Personally, I think this reason is far too speculative and a little ridiculous, but like I said, Vietnam. Now for the moment you have probably been waiting for, but the last feasible reason I could find for why the government would cause a natural disaster is testing weather modification weapons for use in future wars. Take a step back and realize what the implications would be if a military had their hands on a weather altering device. Going back to Operation Popeye during the Vietnam War, the military was able to extend the monsoon season with cloud seeding. But what if they had the ability to create and control hurricanes? Being one of the most destructive weather formations, hurricanes would prove extremely useful in any military's arsenal. However, it is important for us to understand just how hard this would be. The winds of an average hurricane can release upwards of 1.5 trillion watts of power, which, in case you were wondering, is equivalent to about half the world's entire electrical generating capacity in an entire year, which would be extremely difficult for any human to replicate. Not to mention, this is just the energy released from the wind. However, this alone isn't enough to debunk this reason. You see, maybe nobody created Hurricane Katrina, but what if they didn't create it and instead just made it much more powerful? Now, in my opinion, when you think about it from this angle, it makes more sense. What if you were the head of your country's military and you spotted a hurricane traveling into your enemy's territory? Well, it is likely that you would try to take advantage of this. And what if by using a weather modification technique such as cloud seeding, you could directly influence the strength, size, speed, or any other attribute of the hurricane? Now, this is where you can start to see the massive implications of such a weapon. You could turn a category 1 or 2 hurricane into possibly the most powerful hurricane in history, and your enemy would never see it coming unless they had their own advanced weather modification technologies. Okay, now that we have explored a brief history of weather modification and the 3 different reasons I found to make the most sense backing up the theory of HAARP causing Hurricane Katrina, I will let you decide whether you want to believe it or not. However, there is now an elephant in the room that needs to be discussed. What if major militaries started adopting weather modification technology in warfare? Well, don't forget, the US already did this during Operation Popeye. So the better question is, how powerful could these technologies become? Maybe one day scientists will be able to create Category 5 hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina out of thin air. Maybe they will be able to spread a deadly virus around a large area completely undetected by using a tornado. Which, by the way, this has already unintentionally happened during the Joplin tornado back in 2011, where all the survivors caught a rare flesh-eating fungal infection. Or maybe they will create serious droughts over large areas, further contributing to the leading cause of death due to weather, heat exhaustion. In order to prevent any of this from happening, an international treaty was created in 1977 following the declassification of Operation Popeye, banning the use of weather modification in warfare, so hopefully we will be safe. However, the scariest thing of all is that these kinds of technologies are coming whether we like it or not. While controlling the weather might seem like complete science fiction, which some of it still is, it is much more likely that we will develop these kinds of technologies sooner than we will be able to enter black holes, time travel, or create faster than light travel. Once we have access to advanced weather modification technology, an international treaty might not be enough to hold the floodgates closed. And as we continue to push the boundaries of science, the line between natural disasters and human influence may blur. Will we one day control the skies? And if so, who will decide when to unleash the storm? Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out, and goodbye.